Welcome to the second video in the Qualtrics tutorial series. In this video, we will be creating a new question. All right, so to create a new question, there's a couple of ways you can do it, just like everything else in Qualtrics. We can create a new question, we can add a block, we can do other things of that nature. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and talk about some of these different questions over here, or options on the right-hand side. So we have question type. This one is a multiple choice. We also have descriptive text, graphics. It shows us a little introduction or a sample over here to the left-hand side. So we have some static content, standard types of questions, some specialty questions, some advanced things. Not going to have to really deal with any of those. We're most likely going to be in the descriptive text, maybe a graphic if you have images for some reason for your survey. But most of the time we're going to have multiple choice or some kind of text entry. All right, so the next thing we have with multiple choice is our number of choices. And so we can click in here and add a number of choices. It can set up automatic choices. Some other things, they may have single answers, multiple answers, drop-down lists, select boxes, all kinds of different options here. Vertical positioning versus horizontal positioning, force responses, and all of these different things here. We also have some other actions that we can do with our skip logics or display logics and things of that nature. So what we want to do here is probably we're going to add a block. And so welcome to our research study. That's the very first screen. And instead of just adding a question to it, we want to add a block, because if we just click to create new question, it would add one right underneath here, and that would display on the same screen as your informed consent. We don't want to put it on the same screen. So we'll click add block, and then we're going to create a new question. And so we can either click a down arrow and pick out descriptive text or anything else. We can just click create new question and put a blank one in there. I personally like to use the little down arrow because now I can do some descriptive text. And so here we're going to start off with whatever the instructions are for your study. For your instrument that you're going to use to measure either your IV, your DV, or your demographics. All right, so let's start off with the perceived stress scale. So some of you may be using it. This is one of my favorite scales that I use in my research. And each scale should have a set of instructions that come along with it. And so here we have the questions in this scale ask you about your feelings and thoughts during the last month, et cetera, et cetera. We may have to adapt these a little bit for a online environment. Like for instance, this one says, in each case, you'll be asked to indicate by circling how often you felt or thought a certain way. So we're going to have to change the wording on that just a little bit. So what we're going to do is come over here into our text editor, and we're going to say the questions in this scale ask you about your feelings and thoughts during the last month. Notice we don't say perceived stress scale and then do the instructions. We don't want them to know what the name of the scale is because we may introduce some bias that way. So here we would just say, oops, let me get back over here. The questions in this scale ask you about your feelings and thoughts during the last month. In each case, you'll be asked to indicate by checking the response option. Oops. How often you felt or thought a certain way. And so just the basic instructions in that block. And then what we're going to do is add a question underneath that. So create a new question. And so notice we're not creating a new block because we want these instructions to be on the same page as our questions. And so notice here it has Q1, but Q3. What happened to question 2? Well, it doesn't really matter, because what we can do is go in here and we can change this to our code book. And so we can call this PSS instructions, something of that nature. Okay, and then we can click in here and call this PSS1. So then we'll click in here to write our question text. And so what is our question text? In the last month, how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? All right, so let's just double check that I had that memorized correctly. In the last month, how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? Question mark. All right, notice I wrote the sentence exactly the same as I did, or as it's written here on the PSS. All right, and so now I have these different options, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, we don't want the participants to see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 because they're not going to remember what each of those mean. And so here we have to go down and into our choice options. We have only 3 choices. So that means we need to update this and make 4 choices. And we only want them to have a single answer. And then we can choose between vertical or horizontal. So if I click horizontal, it puts these choices across like that. And generally we want to keep the same format as what the instrument has, but depending upon the mobile device, it may not display correctly. So you'll just have to use your best judgment. As long as the answers have the same possible number of responses, like for instance, here we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're missing an option. So I have to make sure that I have enough options. So here's 5 options. And then let's go ahead and change it back to vertical so that we can display it properly. And so now I'll click in here to write choice number 1. So choice number 1 is never. So what happens if I click down? All right, allow text entry. I can put graphics. I can do some piped text. That's a whole new thing, come from somewhere else. So we're not going to mess with that. And so this is never. Never. Look, it automatically added some things for us, or some response choices for us when I hit tab to go to the next one, but that's not what we want. It's not never sometimes. It's never, almost never, sometimes, fairly often, and very often. All right, notice all my capitalizations are the same. They all start with capital letters. The second word has a capital letter because in the response choices, it also has a capital letter. Now, notice that our coding is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But here we don't have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We just have never, almost never, sometimes, etc. So that's where we click on this little gear. We click on the gear, and now we put in scoring. So when I click on scoring, it's going to open up a new window, and we don't, if I click auto, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but that's not what I want. According to my scale, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll go back over here, change that to 0. Whoops. Clear. 0. No. Come on. I don't need your help. It's a 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that's how you match up your code book options along with what's in Qualtrics. And so now that I've got that entered, I click back to editor, and notice it says never, almost never, sometimes, fairly often, very often. And then my codes will show that I have 0 for never up to 4 for very often. Okay, so that's how you enter a question and change the options for the right codings and change the response options for the same. How do you change your question numbers and all of that fun stuff. Okay, so once we're done with this one, we'll go into our next video, which is we'll add one more question, then we'll preview it, and then we'll publish it. So stay tuned.